Hello and welcome back to Parenting Unpacked. Here we have Dr. Kristen Summer.
Hi.
And I am Dr. Siobhan Kennedy-Costantini. And today we are going to be talking to you all about screen time, aren't we, Kristen?
We absolutely are. And it sounds like you're a teacher starting class. Today we are talking about
it does.
the planet.
Today, children.
Here's how osmosis works. No, really. We're talking about screen time.
I mean...
this has been like a long time coming / a hot topic in my social media world in TikTok. And this has been a hot topic for my life for the last 7 years, given that's what I was looking at in my PhD and stuff like that. So yeah, long time coming. Episode 10, all about screen time.
We are ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
We are. So obviously as parents, we're very aware of the general kind of conversation around screen time. It feels like screen time is a topic that all parents feel guilty about if they engage in it, or that's not to say, like, obviously it's a heavily nuanced topic. Like, there's people who are anti-screen time and very proud to share the fact that their child has never seen a screen. Similarly, there are parents who identify that it just doesn't work for them in their lifestyle, which is great. Obviously, you haven't realized by episode 10, our opinion on the matter is you do what works for you and your family. You know best how things are working for you. It's just our kind of platform to talk about the research behind things. And importantly, what the research says doesn't necessarily indicate what you should and shouldn't do in your household. You need to do what works for you and you know your child best. So big caveat starting out. But as Kristen kind of mentioned just before, she did her PhD on this topic. She is heavily interested in and well-versed in the research on how children process information from screens. So why don't you quickly summarize for us what you have learned through your research and then what your studies have shown?
Okay, so my research actually focuses on something very specific called the video deficit effect. And it actually, the reason that I use robots in my research, which feels very random, is because I was trying to alleviate this so-called video deficit effect. So the video deficit effect is this idea that children cannot learn from screens under the age of about 3.5. There is an argument that they can't learn at all. There's an argument to say that they learn significantly worse than if that same information was presented in person in real life. And I was like, okay, well, I reckon it's a social deficit, because one thing that Siobhan and my shared supervisor, Mark Nielsen, did in 2008 did a study on whether making the screen socially interactive actually improved children's learning from it. And by children, I mean, I think they're about 2 years old. So what he found in that study was that if the video screen was interactive with the child, talking back and forth, think FaceTime style stuff, except in 2008 it was like CCTV, which is really random. But anyways, he found that there was no difference in learning between screens and people in real life. Kids could learn equivalently. So I kind of picked up that theory. I'm a social learning theorist. I love social learning. So I was like, you know what? It's probably all about social deficits. So if we can make the screen more social, we can help kids learn better. And the funny thing is I did that by adding a robot. I gave a screen eyes, I gave it movement, I gave it contingent responses, because, you know, if we have to make it a FaceTime style activity, then it's not doing the thing that a lot of parents use TV for, which is a 5-second break. Like, give me a second to have a coffee, give me a second to cook dinner, please just go somewhere else and let me know that you're at least doing something productive to your development. Rather than parents feeling guilty because this screen apparently can't teach them anything. And being a basically digital native myself, I didn't agree with this at all. I learned how to read from a Game Boy. I did all of these things myself learning as a child. And so to me, it didn't make sense. So I was digging into this kind of idea. I added the robot around the screen. And in my very first study on my PhD, I failed to replicate the video deficit, which has existed since TV started. I could not find that effect anywhere. Like, it just didn't exist. So my first PhD study was technically a flop, because if you don't find an effect, it's really hard to get it published. I do plan on writing that this year, but I digress. So I didn't find anything to say that kids learnt any worse from a screen than they do from real life. So when I added the robots in, it didn't make a difference, because the kids were learning from the video demonstration just as well as they were from the person doing it right in front of their face who was interacting with them. So that was the first time I failed to find this effect that I should have found, which has been documented over and over again in the literature, albeit hasn't really been documented at that point in about a decade. So no one's really looked at it. I then have since done this study a few more times and still failed to find this effect. I found it once in a recent study I published last year in the journal Infant Behaviour and Development. I found the effect specifically and only for, I think it's 24-month-old children, 18 to 24 months, and that is it. That is the only age group I could find it for. I couldn't find it in 12 to 18 months, couldn't find it in 24 to 36 months, couldn't find it anywhere else. And it should have been everywhere, because this effect appears to emerge at 12 months and then disappears at 3.5 years. And I did 1 to 5 and didn't find it anywhere. So
yeah, it's so interesting, right? Like, and I wonder, like, you're probably a great person to talk about this topic, in that when it comes to the video deficit effect, so the basic building blocks of this idea or this theory is that children in specific, between 1 to 3, really need that social element.
Mm-hmm.
That when it comes to videos and digital information via screens, children, when at an age when they're so socially primed to learn, require social information, which makes complete sense. And I think something that the research around the video deficit effect really was focused on, or not focused on, but was an important part of that research, is a lot of it was done in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, when screens were very static, when even if you think to watching cartoons as a kid, you and I in the 90s, yes, that's exactly what it was. You sat down, there was no interaction. Whereas nowadays, even our 2 children, the majority of the screens that my child watches are highly interactive videos / games on an iPad, where he has to act on the screen. He has to put the petrol in the car to make it go. Like, it's a highly engaged and interactive task. It's not social per se, because why would he interact with a human when he can interact with a digger, his favorite thing in the whole damn world? But what our kids nowadays are dealing with is very different to screens and digital information in the 80s, like worlds apart. And the way we interact with digital kind of stuff now versus the 80s, like, the smartphone was only introduced in 2007. Can you imagine a world without a smartphone? Yes, we lived it, but the world is so different. And a lot of these studies, obviously they're being done now by people like you, don't necessarily, a lot of the rhetoric around screens doesn't take this into account.
So basically, that's a really great point, and this is the thing that I run with in my research and try to propose in a really tentative way, because it's hard to say anything about a null result when you're null hypothesis testing. But the thing I say is that the world has changed in such a hugely dramatic way when it comes to technology. So not only has the content changed to be more in line with the science of children's attention, which makes them more engaged and more interactive, but the technology has become more socially contingent. It responds to them, and they've watched their parents be completely enmeshed in these devices from the moment that they were born. So if people are treating these devices as though they are a social other, of course they're going to learn from screens in the same way they learn from people, because one thing that's really important about social learning is that it depends on a whole host of things. So it depends on who's demonstrating the information, how reliable that source is in terms of a hierarchy of preference. We don't know where kids are taking this level of screen as being a valuable source of information anymore. There's so much that goes into it, but the world has really changed.
As parents, this is exactly the point you just made. As parents, we demonstrate daily to our children that screens are valuable, that they're a social currency.
Yeah.
That, and I know we've spoken about this off camera with each other and off podcast, that both Sienna and Timo are obsessed. Anytime I answer the phone, he goes, "Granddad, Grandma, Granny," because he's like, "Great, who are you talking to? I want to talk to them." And sometimes even my alarm goes off to remind me to take my medication. And he's like, "Where's Granny?" And then, so it's just, in his mind, the small black rectangle that's in my hand is access to the people he loves. It provides him social connection. Obviously, it does other things, and he knows it does other things.
Yeah.
But not only, exactly, as you say, like, the way we interact with technology has changed. Like, it's heavily connected to the way we interact with each other socially.
Yeah, so I think the problem with screen time information that's out there at the moment is because research takes roughly 17 years to go from being published to policy. So the things you kind of see in the AAP at the moment about screen time really revolve around research that was published a good 1 to 2 decades ago. And it is probably a little bit more recent than that, but that research is still happening. Given that I'm one of the few people that seems to not find this effect anymore, there's probably a lot of other people out there. It's probably a bit of a publication bias issue, which means that if you don't have a significant finding, you can't publish it, and you can't really set up a study to be significant where there is no difference. And no difference study is a null, which means you can't publish that a lot of the time. And we're working towards changing that in science. But regardless, the advice on screen time at the moment feels a little bit outdated because there isn't enough information out there. And people on social media fearmonger parents by saying they're not learning anything. And I think the biggest thing I want to make clear in this episode is that they absolutely are. In some cases, they learn just as much. In the studies that I have conducted, I have watched thousands of toddlers learn just as much from a screen as they do from a person sitting right in front of them. Now, this might not be for all types of learning stimulus. This might not be for all types of people. It might not be all types of content, but I get hundreds of messages telling me that they appreciate that I talk about cocomelon not being cocaine on TikTok because their kids learn so much from it. And they just want to feel a little less guilty about the fact that they need a break and they don't have the support to do it. So they put their child in front of cocomelon because it's the only show that will maintain an infant's attention long enough, because Bluey won't do it. Daniel's Tiger won't keep their attention long enough, and the Discovery Channel absolutely won't do it, especially for a little baby. So yeah, the fact that they feel guilty because now they're not only being told that the screens do so many things to a child's brain, but they aren't learning anything either, it just makes them feel like crap. And it's just not true. So I think the first thing we can start off with in this episode is, can they learn from screens? Yes. Can they learn equivalently to people? Still out for debate. But in my small sample of studies, yes. In some instances, yes. And you should release that guilt. Because your child is taking information in, they are treating information as their social being. They treat a screen as something that is really important because you're treating it as valuable, and they're learning all the time. So yeah, no guilt there. Your kid's going to learn. But yeah, I'll let Siobhan ask the next question before I go on forever.
Yeah, of course. So I think that's really important. And so we kind of touched on the idea that the AAP, so the American Association of Pediatrics, whichever they are.
American Pediatrics.
AAP, American Association of Pediatrics or Pediatricians.
Whatever.
Anyway, they're pediatricians. They're an association. They're in America. They're often used as the kind of guiding light of recommendations for how parents should parent their children. And their current position is that 0 screens or screen time until the age of 2. Which in our modern world with COVID and lockdowns and isolation where we don't have access to, pre-COVID we had many people had limited family support, limited social support of any kind, and so they were often struggling just trying to get through the day and manage 1, 2, 3, however many children, whilst trying to do that without screens. And then we add COVID to the mix. We tell people to stay inside their houses for months at a time. So guess what? People rely on screens because mama needs a break, dada needs a break, people need breathing space and breathing time. And that's okay. It's okay. And again, if you don't do screens, the screens don't work for your family, that's great. That's wonderful. If you do screens and they do work for your family, that is great. That is wonderful. We're just here to share the science that it's not the end of the world. They aren't damaging. It's just that child development and the way children's brains learn, it's just not that, they're not that brittle. Children, like humans, are highly resilient, highly adaptable. The problem with screens comes when kids are watching them for 6 and 7 and 8 hours a day. But that's true with anything. Like if your toddler or baby is in a bouncer for 8 hours a day, that's problematic. If they're in a pram for 8 hours a day, it's like humans need variance. They need different experiences. So that's kind of my takeaway when it comes to this is everything in moderation, including moderation.
Absolutely. And I think, so one thing that the AAP does poorly, that we talked about in Candace's episode, is that they start with an abstinence-only approach rather than a less hard-lined, more understanding approach of how people actually do things. So with the idea that you have 0 screen time for children under the age of 2 years, you negate a whole lot of family circumstances, a whole lot of different things. You don't understand a lot of things. You don't understand temperament because some children will need have higher demand temperaments, which means those parents burn out faster. So they need something, those parents need something to have a bigger break. So if you have an easygoing child, look, that kid's probably going to get less TV, especially in the middle of a pandemic. But the thing is, abstinence only style advice ostracizes parents who actually need the guidance and the support. So by saying just don't give your kid under 2 TV, you're not telling the parent what to do if they do need to give TV. You're not telling them what type of content to give them. You're not telling them like how much is okay. You're just ostracizing them. And then it's like, well, if I've already given them 10 minutes of TV today, I'm basically a write-off for the rest of the child's life. I'll try again with my next kid. And it might not be that extreme, but it feels that way to a lot of parents.
Yeah.
And the thing is, a little bit of TV as a tool every day is absolutely fine. It's not going to destroy your child's brain. It isn't going to change the way that their brain develops. It's going to expose them, sure, to technology in their early life, but that is fine because they're going to be using technology for their entire life. They're going to be so much more enmeshed in it, so have so many more things that they need to do at higher levels than we've ever had to do. It is not a terrible thing for them to see technology. I mean, they probably see you using your phone, so, you know, it's not an issue in itself. It's when you have so much screen time on and your child is so absorbed in that screen time that they aren't doing any other developmentally appropriate activities. For a 6-month-old that might be trying to crawl, you've put the TV on and maybe, you know, you're using it a little bit too much and they need to be able to have some physical activity. That's when it becomes a problem. But using it for half an hour while you cook dinner or 15 minutes so you can have a coffee break, these things are okay. Or using it when your child is sick and miserable and crying and the only thing that seems to settle them is something that keeps their brain engaged while keeping their body calm. These are all things that are totally fine, but the AAP completely avoids giving advice on this. And then they also skip over like the content then as well. What kind of content is appropriate to give to a 0 to 2-year-old? There's just so many things that are wrong with this abstinence-only approach. And I saw someone else on TikTok, a couple of pediatricians, they have like a podcast themselves, and I looked at an excerpt and they were talking about the problem with screen time before bed. And I think it just became a really scary message for a lot of parents. I mean, great to have this information going out there. I'm so glad that there's a lot of like experts standing on platforms and sharing information for free with parents because that's important. But delivering messages that make parents feel guilty and fearful, they were basically saying that if kids receive TV 30 minutes before bed, they're going to get a significantly poorer sleep. And this is really problematic for a lot of families that rely on TV to help their kids go to sleep. Now, it's not something that I agree with. I wouldn't put a TV on to help my child go to sleep, nor would I do it for myself. We don't have TVs in our house. Not in our house, that's a lie, in our bedroom. But yeah, it's just like a straight don't do it, rather than a here's how you can move away from that, and here's a good replacement activity. So you're making the parent feel guilty and then giving them no resource to like, what can we do instead? Like, we know that it's bad now. We know that exposure to blue light gives you a poorer quality of sleep. There's a bunch of studies on this, but what do we do instead? Because this seems to be the only thing that calms my child down. And it's usually reading a book with your child. And that means that you have more involvement with your child at bedtime. And that then rolls into like, do I have time to, spend half an hour to an hour putting my toddler to sleep? I have a newborn. Like, how else am I supposed to do this? And it just gets wrapped up in all these different familial kind of obligations that don't work for every family. And there's just no resources or support for how we can make what we've got better. So do you have any idea about the sleep kind of stuff, Siobhan?
Oh, this is such a great question. I struggle when it comes to sleep advice because I have a disaster sleeper, which we've touched on previously. Okay, no, that's not true. I do have some advice. But I always kind of feel a bit funny sharing it because, my sleep situation is not, mind you, no child's sleep is perfect. So why am I beating myself up prematurely?
I don't know.
Okay, let's start on this. So we've talked about how it's okay in moderation and there's ways to use it in a really effective way. So let's go down that train of thought. Mm-hmm. Let's kind of share what works for us, other strategies that maybe we don't use but that can be useful. So for us, this is actually a really timely episode. We've recorded this at the perfect time because we've just had our first week of freedom. We had 2 weeks of lockdown or isolation quarantine because we got COVID. Thankfully, everyone in our household was vaccinated, double vaccinated. We were not very affected by it. For us, it was a mild cold, so touch wood, we were very lucky. However, the real challenge came where we had to spend 2 weeks inside with a toddler. And the poor boy was crying his eyes out going, bike, park, want to go to park. And I had to very sadly explain that we couldn't, and just seeing the heartbreak. So we went to screens. We watched a lot of screens. So previously, screen time was a part of our daily ritual. He'd watch a little bit in the morning while I woke up bleary-eyed. As we've discussed, I am not a morning person. So as I slowly wake up and let the caffeine kickstart my body, I watch a little bit of screen time. And then sometimes at night in the afternoon, we kind of, as a bit of a wind down, and similar to how you've described with Sienna, he's usually playing with blocks and then kind of checks in every 2 seconds with the screen. It's like, is that interesting? No, move along. But during this 2-week lockdown period, it was just YouTube because it was raining outside. Blocks, he would only hold his attention for a short time. And did I feel shitty about it? A bit. I did feel a bit shitty about it, but I had to remind myself this is just a blip. Like, this is not how we normally do things. Things are unusual at the moment, and we're just managing the best way we can. Similarly, he had a lot more chocolate than normal. We had a lot of chocolate. I had a lot of chocolate. So we're just trying to manage. So I think it's really trying to not beat ourselves up too much. And this is kind of, it's very, it's not child-focused advice, it's very parent-focused advice, in that just because you're doing something one way doesn't mean it will always be that way. So I knew that we have 2 weeks stuck at home and we're just doing what we need to manage. And then just because he's getting a lot of screen time at the moment doesn't mean that we've set a bar and that's a level that he will expect at all times. He preferred getting a lot of screen time, and he has expressed that he's less impressed the fact that we've dialed it down. And I've shared that I understand that, and sorry, too bad, so sad, we're going outside to go on the swing, which is fine once we get there. Anyway, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter too much, and you don't have to be stuck in a pattern. You can change things, and they chuck tantrums because they want it, and that's okay. I want things too. I want to sleep in. I don't get to do that. Anyway.
Yeah,
that's my long, super wild-winded, that like it kind of doesn't matter too much in that, like, yeah. Anyway, I don't have any more specific information.
Yeah, look,
How ridiculous.
I think it's probably a really good thing to run through what we do.
Yes.
Because we've obviously done a lot of research on it, understand how to manage toddler behavior too. I really understand that very explicitly. And there's a lot of things, like people are like, when I stopped watching cocomelon, my child stopped asking for it. Like they no longer ask for it. And it's amazing. The behavior change, the reduction in tantrums is amazing. And like, yes, that's amazing that there's a reduction in tantrums, but it's probably not cocomelon that caused those tantrums to begin with. It was probably how you disconnected from screen time. It was probably the unpredictability with which the screen time was coming and going because they didn't have any control over it. There's probably a whole bunch of things. And when you just cut down screen time altogether, of course you're going to have less tantrums about that thing because you're saying no less. And when you say no less, a child is less frustrated, which means less tantrums. It's just that simple. So it's probably not the shows you cut out. It's probably the fact that you have more predictability in your routine. And that's something I really focus on with Sienna. So our screen time routine is that we always watch Saturday and Sunday morning cartoons on free to air. We always watch it then. We never watch cartoons on weekday mornings. That's our routine. We never do it weekday mornings, always on weekend mornings because we don't get a lot of time with our daughter. Like during the week, she's now gone to full-time kindies. So yeah, we play together in the mornings, and that's something that I keep for us. And so she always knows it's a weekday. We aren't watching TV. Does she ask for TV in the morning because it's smack bang in the middle of the lounge room where we're playing and it reminds her that it's there? Absolutely. Do I say no? Absolutely. I remind her, never on weekdays, always on weekend mornings. And does she chuck a tantrum? She's 2. She chucks a tantrum every time I say no about anything now. Does it last very long? No, it's about 3, not even 3 seconds. It's probably about 1 second of her being like, ah. And then she's like, fine, let's go play with the Barbies, because she loves Barbies. So that's our screen time there. The other time we use screen time is for my little car screamer. She is a car screamer. She's always been a car screamer until she was 14 months old. She did not like to look at a screen. Once she liked the screen, and yes, it took her until 14 months old to care about screen time, even though I wish that it happened significantly earlier. But once she hit 14 months old, and I slipped a screen into her hand, we went from not being able to drive for 1 minute without blood-curdling screams that never ended to being able to drive anywhere for any length of time with no upset, no screaming, no threat of danger, no like extreme levels of cortisol because I'm letting my child cry in the back seat and I can't touch her. All these kinds of things was magic. It was just like, and so she knows that on long drives, she gets screen time. On short drives, she doesn't. And I always use the words always and never. And I'll always try and prime her and say, we're not getting it this time. It's a short drive. We're only going to grandma's. It's a short drive. We're only going to the shops. It's a short drive. Or we're going to Nana's. It's a long drive. So you get the screen. We're currently trying to tweak it at the bit. Oh my God, I can't talk. We're currently trying to tweak it at the moment because she gets very upset when she gets in the car and I say, no, it's a short drive. You don't get the phone. And she gets really upset because she wants it. And she wasn't warned that it was going to be a short drive. She knew she was getting in a car, but she didn't know that it was only a short drive. So she was like getting excited to watch screen time because she doesn't get it very often. And yeah, she got really upset about it. And she gets really upset about it every time. So I keep being like, damn it, I need to tell her before we get in the car, earlier in like the interaction, getting ready to go out, that we're only going a short way, so we're not going to watch the screen. We can choose one toy to take with us, and we can choose a song to play instead. So having that even before she gets in the car seat, before she gets the opportunity to get excited about the possibility of having a screen, and that will negate any kind of tantrum at me saying no. And
Have you tried that strategy yet?
I keep forgetting because it's only
I know,
just
it's
started,
so tricky, right?
Yeah, because she's only just started being like that massive toddler stage. Like she's always given me tantrums. She's always been a tantrum kid because she has one of those more high demanding temperaments. But she's only just started getting really like
frustrated.
Yeah, really toddlerish. Like, you know, that whole like
Yes, yeah.
terrible twos, not terrible twos, they're brilliant twos, but also very intense. So she's just kind of getting into that phase now where she's really not okay, and I need to work more with her on it. So
Yeah.
I keep forgetting, which is my fault. So the tantrums are my fault for not giving her the warning and setting the expectations in advance. But I understand that, and I know why she's upset,
Yes.
and I acknowledge it. So when she's really upset, I'm like, I hear you. I know you'd really like to watch the phone, but we're only going a short distance, and we never watch the phone on short drives. We always watch the phone on long drives. We can watch the phone when we go to Nana's on Wednesday, wherever it is. So I try to give her like a time when she does get the phone, rather than it just being like, I have no control. Everyone else decides everything for me. I can never like get anything that I want. Everyone just keeps saying no, and there's no reason why. Just if you just keep going down this path of just saying no screen time right now, and they're like, they get upset. That's them getting upset is basically them asking why. And when you say no, or stop being naughty, or you can stand in the corner, or any of this kind of stuff, it's basically just you saying, because I said so, and end of discussion. And that's a really not fun conversation to have with anyone, to be told, why would you do that to me? And their response is, because I can. Like,
Yeah. No, you raise a really good point though, where it comes about like setting expectations and having guidelines. It's so true. Like young children, their lives from their perspective are highly unpredictable. They don't necessarily, and like children aren't great at understanding and following patterns. So even if from our viewpoint, it's very clear that this happens and then we do this, they don't, not only do they not have the understanding of time, they also don't have an understanding of recognizing patterns in the way that we do as adults. So warning children in advance, and also recognizing that just because you gave them a warning doesn't mean they understand. They still might get upset, and that's okay too. But yeah, when it comes to like sharing the way that we handle screens, we're not as specific about always and never, partly because Timo has a more relaxed temperament. He is slow to warm up child. So he takes a little while to get going, can be a little wary or reticent and not super on board with changing patterns. But once he kind of understands what's happening, he's pretty willing to be flexible. So because of that, we do have more flexibility in the way that we do things. So, for example, this morning we watched some TV. We don't every morning. Usually he watches it with me. I think partly because for him, mum is comfort and dad is fun. So as you kind of mentioned a little while ago, like times where his brain can be engaged but his body can be relaxed. So when we do watch screen time, he usually asks for a blanket and to cuddle mummy. So we always sit together when we're on the screen, because I'm lucky my husband does the cooking, because I can't cook. If I can, it just doesn't taste good. And so, yeah, if we're watching screens, I'm always with him. And often I'm commentating or discussing, we're having a conversation about what's on the screen. So for us, it is socially contingent, whether the content of the screen is or not, because we're conversing about it together. So even if I'm being a quote-unquote bad parent and not paying attention and I'm doing something on the other screen or on my phone, he's always initiating and being like, Mommy, Sophie, blue car. And I go, yes. And then I go, okay, shit, pay attention. And then we comment on the fact that she had a blue car. Her yellow car broke, so she needed the blue car. And so that's been a really important part of the way that we do screens, is that I am very intentional about being physically with him and socially commenting on the stuff that we're doing. So it provides that context of not only do I know what he's watching, I am engaged with it as well. So it becomes something we can talk about, and we regularly talk about his characters, even to the point where this is both wonderful and a little bit sad. We always make pillow forts right before bed. That's one of his activities, and he sets up a little pillow that's his TV chair, and then he sets up a pillow that's his TV, and he presses the button to turn it on, and then he recounts the stories of the shows that he watches.
I love it.
It's so adorable. And I'm like, your imaginary play is screen time.
It is amazing. And so
how meta is that?
But it's this generation, right? Like this, you you perform imaginative play on the things you observe, and
Absolutely.
technology is a big one of them. That's why they use the phones the way they do. That's why they answer the phone with a hand up to their like a flat hand, rather than like what we would do, which is like your thumb and your pinky out, and like, you know, like a old school like hand set. Like they don't even know what those things look like anymore. So like,
absolutely,
it's not a sign of addiction if your child gets upset about being told no, or that they're pretend playing screen time. It just means that that's something that's part of their world. And as much as it's great and important to scaffold screen time, it's also not always possible if you're doing it because you need a break. I have a child who I learned a new definition the other day, is high surgency, which means that she talks and like demands all the time. Like it doesn't stop. The moment she started to learn to talk, my husband is like centimeters from falling apart because he's just so exhausted by the overwhelming like onslaught of our daughter all the time. Like she's just one of those kids that just doesn't stop demanding or talking and asking for attention. And for children like that, you burn out so quickly. And I get to the point where like I need to shut my brain off or I'm going to yell. And I would rather shut my brain off, sit next to my child with the TV on, and we have a routine. Like if I am burnt out and it's just me and my daughter, we will sit down, I'll turn the TV on, she gets to watch her show, and mum gets to read her book. So I sit down next to her because she loves physical contact. That's the one thing that keeps her calm, and she'll climb all over me, which is not always ideal because sometimes I need personal space, but we haven't figured that one out yet. And yeah, I'll sit there and I'll read my book. It's usually cocomelon, and there's not a lot to commentate on cocomelon anymore because it's just the nursery rhymes that I sing to her anyways. But yeah, she knows that like if mummy needs a break, that she gets a cocomelon break and I get to read my book, because I need that time to not hear constant crying, constant demands for things, constant questions and asking to do this or do that. And for a lot of people who don't have a child who's high in surgency, this you probably can't imagine this, but it's literally from the moment she wakes up until the moment she goes to sleep. It's constant. There is no break for anyone in our household. There is no break. So we create breaks, and it's okay to not be on all the time, to not be leading that learning or that scaffolding, as long as you're putting on a show that you are comfortable with them watching, especially for the younger children, and knowing what they're watching. It doesn't really it's not a bad thing if you're not scaffolding that information at the same time. It's ideal, but you don't have to if you're using it as a tool, like at all.
Absolutely. Like we're lucky in that for us, because of the way our family dynamics is, that is something we can do. I don't do it all the time. I mean, sometimes we do it exactly the same when I'm just tapped out and something else. So we're just sharing different ways of doing things. And one isn't right or wrong.
No.
I think it's important to know that when it comes to TV and screen time, like I've had parents be like, which shows are the most educational? What one should my child watch? It's my answer is none of them. When it comes to your child, the best teacher is you. And if your child watches a specific show that's not necessarily developmentally advantageous for them, it's also, not only is it not developmentally advantageous, it's neither a disadvantage. So just because you're watching it doesn't mean it's a problem, but it's not necessarily going to do wonders for your child either. The best teacher is you, but no teacher can be on 24/7. Like, you need a break and you're a human, which is obviously a message that we share a lot, particularly during these coronavirus times, where so many of us are burnt out so often. And I guess when we think back to previous generations, I was having this conversation with some mums in my sensory class this morning, that one mum was one of 6 children, another was one of 7, and they've just had their second child, and they're both talking to each other going, how like, I'm so burnt out with 2, how could I possibly do more? How did our mothers do more? And one of them shared that her mum says of her grandchildren that they get so much of her. that she is constantly interacting with them, constantly making eye contact, constantly engaging and talking with them. And she said that her mum shared with her, I didn't talk to any of you. I just put you down. In the past, children were not expected, both children were not expected to be interacted with, and children didn't expect that because that's not what they got. But also you had a whole street of children and friends and family and community. So it was shared across a group, whereas nowadays we're often, particularly during coronavirus, we're the one and only, or us and our partner are the one and only. And if we're lucky, there might be a grandparent or two. Access to relief isn't an option for so many of us, which is why screen time is essential to mental health stability for so many of us. And that's okay. Like, that's a perfectly acceptable use.
Exactly. And to just veer back away from making sure that no one feels guilty about screen time, because that's what this whole episode keeps coming back to, is us making it clear that you should never feel guilty about using screen time. There's effective ways that you can manage it and use it, and things that maybe you should avoid that we're talking about in this episode, but we also want you to make you feel safe. But one of the things that you talked about was that people ask you, what shows should I let my child watch? And this is one that comes up really often on TikTok. It's one that's, gone a little bit crazy with a few viral videos. A lot of people recently on TikTok discovered, thanks to one guy, and I'll explain this in detail in a second, that cocomelon isn't good for their kids, apparently. They call it that cocomelon is cocaine. And they found that another show, Songs for Little by Miss Rachel, who seems to be a social media star, is amazing for teaching them words and colors and all these kinds of things. And there's a few things to unpack in that. I'm going to do it now because it's just been grinding on me because they keep making all these assumptions that cocomelon is bad and Miss Rachel is amazing. And I need to just clarify.
Anything that's that black and white is wrong.
Yeah, I need to clarify some misconceptions. So
and
you can go on. It's okay.
No. I was just going to say, like a good idea to keep in mind is anyone who says X is good and Y is bad, wrong. It's never that simple. Nothing is ever that straightforward. Mm-hmm. Take it away.
Exactly. Okay, so what happened on TikTok, if you have not been in the parenting TikTok world, or I think it's even on Instagram, I think there's a creator on Instagram that also started this issue at the same time, and her following boomed really quickly, and I made it very quick.
Is this the 4-second thing?
Yes. Yeah.
Or 4 frames a second or whatever?
I very quickly got in the bad books of the Instagram creator because I posted some stories being like, this is not scientifically accurate. But anyways, moving on from drama, basically what this creator on TikTok did was he was like, let's record how long screen changes are in between cocomelon. And he's like, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. And that's like how quickly the screens were changing, the scenes were changing. And he was basically saying that it's activating the dopaminergic reward center of the brain, which is the same thing that's activated when people take cocaine, and it's becoming addictive and all this kind of stuff. And I was just like, there's a lot wrong with this. The first one is that he took a sample from a very specific section of cocomelon that he probably went and looked for. So one that did have those really quick scene changes. And I'm pretty sure that the caption of the video was "Stick to Sesame Street." But if you go to Sesame Street, they also have very quick scene changes, almost identical to cocomelon. Not always, but cocomelon doesn't always have those very quick scene changes either. And then there was some more critique saying that, well, cocomelon is forever panning and there's lots of bright colors. And if you actually sit down and watch Sesame Street, it also pans, it also has bright colors, and it's also got fantastical creatures. Yeah, all
children's show have bright colors. That's how.
So there's a few features about children's shows that people seem to have a problem with on social media at the moment that are actually there because they capitalize on children's attention to keep them attending to the screen, which is what you want if you need a goddamn break. If you want to get attention for longer than what the attention span of a child is, which is about a minute per year of age. So for a 2-year-old, that's 2 minutes. If you want them to stay longer, you have to use things called attention getters, which is what we use in really like old school developmental psych research. And those are things like noises, colors, flashy things on the screen, scene changes, all these kinds of things. So children's television has changed in the last couple of decades based on scientific evidence about how to capture and maintain infant attention. And Sesame Street does it, cocomelon does it, Songs for Littles does it, everybody does it. And just because one person took a very specific excerpt of cocomelon and said, this is how fast the scene changes are, does not mean that the entire episode is that fast, does not mean that every episode is that fast, and it does not mean that other shows that are perceived to be better and slower paced are also actually slower paced. So there's a few things I'll bring in here with the research. So with the research, they have found that there are executive functioning deficits after watching a fast-paced show. That was one study done. And what that study found was that if kids watched SpongeBob, which was a scene change every 9 seconds, that kids had an executive functioning deficit immediately after, like directly after watching the show. They watched like 5 minutes of the show, and then directly after they had an executive functioning deficit, compared to a play school show where they never change the scenes. It's just, it's adults with puppets on the screen for a really long period of time. So they called SpongeBob fast-paced and play school or something like that slow-paced. Now, people kind of took this and they were like, because they found this research, it's not new. This research is like over like a decade and a half old, but people found it and they were like, look, this is evidence that it affects and ruins children's attention. One, it was only short-term, immediately after. And there's a bunch of longitudinal studies that find that moderate screen exposure leads to no long-term deficits. There's even not that much research to say that high screen exposure leads to long-term deficits. So first of all, like immediate changes in the way a child is processing information doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. It might just mean that SpongeBob is a more interesting show, and because they only compared it to another television show rather than something that's equally interesting, I don't know, like playing a game with a person that's also stimulating, doesn't, like, whether that leads to the same deficit in executive functioning, which is measured by a single test, which, doesn't really get into what's happening in the child's brain. The child could just be distracted thinking about the fun thing that they watched, or they could be really upset because they were really into watching SpongeBob and they didn't get to finish the episode. So of course they're not going to perform as well on the task. And then the other thing is, this same author was like, it could also be the fantastical nature of the show, because they're not real life characters, it's more imaginative. So she then did another study like the next year, looking at whether a real life show or a fantastical show of the same rate changed executive functioning. And she found that children that watched fantastical shows had an executive functioning deficit relative to children that didn't. So that evidence in and of itself
is I haven't
not
heard that study. That's amazing.
Yeah, so that in and of itself is not evidence to say that it's ruining children's attention. And I know that was on a 9-second, which we'd now call a slow-paced show with SpongeBob. But that in and of itself is not saying that attention is being destroyed, which is something that I hear a lot, by television, that it's addicting. That's just not part of it. It's just that we have limited information on it, and so far no evidence. And there's a lot of longitudinal studies that find that there is no significant effect in terms of bad things on children's development. And they follow these children from like infancy all the way up to, I don't even know how long. I feel like they were in the 20s, some of them. So we don't have any evidence yet to say that it does anything bad. We have overwhelming evidence, meta-analyses and systematic reviews, which is the collection of studies that say that it isn't bad. And we do know something for certain, and that's that for children in high-risk environments, TV is good. There is one time when TV is good. It's more educational and it's more safe, and that is in high-risk environments when parents either cannot be present or are suffering a host of different problems that lead them to be, if a child is seen or heard, Yeah, and that's something that Candace talked about in her episode with us, episode 7, was that she was raised by a TV, but that was a good thing because it kept her safe. She was not bothering anyone and she wasn't being bothered. So there's so many things that go into this, but overwhelmingly, there is no evidence to say that screen time negatively impacts any of the things that people are saying it does. And it's very likely that this toddler behavior you're seeing is toddler behavior. Now, I know that there are multiple influencers now that talk about the fact that toddler tantrums are actually because of screen time. And I can tell you that's not the case. That's very false. It's because you're no longer saying no as much, and you've set expectations and understanding, and you've created rules for what you can and can't watch. And it's not causing ADHD like influencers keep telling you. Screen time does not cause ADHD or something that looks like ADHD and is being falsely diagnosed as ADHD. None of those things are true. There is no scientific evidence. There's a couple of things on Psychology Today written by the one pediatrician. She's written like a bunch of awful like articles on screen time. But when you look at the research she's citing, it's all very distorted the way she's written it. And that's what a lot of influencers talking about screen time use. They use these Psychology Today articles written by a pediatrician who has no expertise in screen time at all. And yeah, there's no evidence. So the thing that you need to take away from this is it doesn't cause ADHD. It's not the reason your toddler has tantrums. It doesn't cause attention deficits. It doesn't cause addiction and become a drug. And it's fine. Like, yes, don't use it all the time, but yeah.
The dopaminergic pathways of like the cocaine, like guess what else like feeds on dopaminergic pathways? Ice cream. Like food in general, any food like activates the same neurochemical pathways. So that doesn't mean that like a hamburger is cocaine. Like these equivalencies are just highly inaccurate and irresponsible. And then similarly, like I think it's a great point that you raised about how when people say that when I stopped screen time, my kids' tantrum stopped. Yes, because you stopped saying no, as Kristen pointed out, but presumably you stopped screen time with a plan. You had a plan about what was and what wasn't happening. You communicated that plan and you held the line. You were very clear and firm with your boundaries, which is what so many toddlers need. They need to know that someone's in charge, that there's a plan for what is and isn't happening, and I can expect a consistent response. So if provided you're doing that with how you use screen time, then that can be really beneficial and helpful. So this ties into the way that Kristen says that she does things is that sometimes she says yes and sometimes she says no. And a child, for the most part, is aware that there are predictable outcomes about when she gets it and when she doesn't. Is she happy with that all the time? Certainly not. But that's how humans work. We're not always happy with how things happen. But it's that predictability and consistency that can really help your child manage their expectations and therefore manage their disappointments and therefore their frustrations, which is really the source of so many tantrums in toddlers.
Exactly. Now, I did forget that I was trying to answer a question about what shows to watch. Yes. I never got to that point. So we'll come back to, because everyone likes to talk about Songs for Littles. It's in my comments, they're my messages all the time. And how it's teaching their kids way more than cocomelon. And my answer is it's different content. They're learning what they're being taught by Miss Rachel because she's teaching them something that isn't nursery rhymes. Yeah. Cocomelon isn't directly teaching specific word to object things. It's not teaching this is the color green. This is a bulldozer. Because I think Blippi's another one that gets brought up too because it's very similar to Miss Rachel. Cocomelon is engaging and fun and pleasurable to watch because it's sing-songy and it's moving and active, and that's a really great tool when you need a break because it keeps your child's attention. But Blippi and Miss Rachel probably don't keep children's attention quite as much because they don't have as many attention getters. They still do. They still have the noises and the emphasis on the screen, but they're not going to keep a child's attention for quite as long. But what they are doing is they're making explicit relations between a sound and a object, or a word and a color. And that's why your child is learning more from those. Your child is learning a little bit from cocomelon, but no one's ever said that cocomelon's educational. Like, some kids learn the potty song, some kids feel comfortable like to move houses because cocomelons normalize that, and those things are a lot harder to measure than discrete words and colors and things like that. So that's why it might feel like Songs for Littles or Blippi are teaching your child more and making you feel vindicated in switching from cocomelon to Songs for Littles and Blippi. But the thing is, you don't have to completely cut one out. Treat them as separate entities to be used as different tools. Use cocomelon when you need a break and your child isn't paying attention to Miss Rachel or Blippi because they're just not as engaging. And use Miss Rachel and Blippi when you have your consistent screen time, when you are cooking dinner and you can't be there with them or something like that, where you want them to learn something. Choose what you need and when you need it. Use both tools. It's completely up to you. And in terms of content, the only thing I'll say is that don't put violent content on. So there's some evidence that says that children, especially children with the toys of the TV show, are highly likely to act out the scenes in the TV show. And children are found to act out the prosocial or the aggressive behavior that's then seen on the TV show. So this was a study done by Mark Nielsen as well ages ago. And I think a bunch of other people have done it. And like it tracks all the way back to a study by Greenfield. Like, lots of people have done this study with different shows, but the one that I teach in my lecture on media is they showed kids Smurfs and then gave kids Smurf toys, and kids would act out the prosocial themes of the show. So they would learn the prosocial behaviors, and that's awesome. This is a component of social learning. But when they showed kids Ben 10, which I don't even think is aired anymore, but there's plenty of other violent TV shows for children now, and this is for your middle childhood kids as well. If they had the Ben 10 characters, they would act out the violent and aggressive themes. And I'm pretty sure that they will also act out these violent and aggressive themes without the toys as well. They just do it to a lesser degree. And this kind of behavior tracks back all the way to the origin of social learning theory, which was Albert Bandura's stuff when he did the Bobo doll experiment. So for those of you who don't know what the Bobo doll experiment is, basically kids were sat in a room with a TV, and that TV showed an adult punching a Bobo doll. So they were aggressing.
So Bobo doll's a big inflatable doll.
Yeah, like a big inflatable clown. You can go to my TikTok. I've got like a video on this, and you can see the imagery. But yeah, it's a big inflatable clown, and an adult is just like punching it, and it bounces back, and they punch it again, and they look really aggressive. And then they are taken into the room with the Bobo doll afterwards. So they've just watched this happen on TV. They're taken into the room with the Bobo doll, and they're just there's all sorts of things in that room. It's a playroom that kids go straight to that toy, and they that Bobo doll, and they start punching it, and they punch it, and they punch it, and then they don't just punch it. So they're copying the behavior that they saw on the screen. They get hammers, they get swords, they get all sorts of stuff and start attacking this poor Bobo doll. But they're learning this aggressive type of behavior. So in terms of choosing your content, choose things that you would like your child to imitate and emulate in the real world, and avoid the things that you don't really want them to do.
Yeah, and that's such a good point. Like, children, and I think when it comes to like content of screens, children are always learning. When it comes to content of anything they're experiencing, children are always learning. And importantly, young children, so before the age of 5 or 6, that is how children learn. They don't learn from instruction, which is one of the reasons that formal education typically doesn't start until 5 or 6 or 7 years of age, is that that's just their brains aren't wired to sit down and here's the information, which possibly helps explain some of the video deficit effect of previous studies where like lots of the learning was a screen talking out and telling. But young children before the age of 6 do not learn very effectively from sit down, here is the information, recall it. Instead, they learn from things like the Bobo doll experiment. They learn through modeling and through imitation. That is by far and away the best way that they learn. So this comes exactly to the point you just made, in that if there's stuff that you do want them to, or that you're okay with them repeating, then that's fine for them to watch. If there's things that are a bit more violent, a bit more scary, more confronting, maybe those are things to avoid. But any screen your child's watching, they're learning. Any information they're getting, they're learning. So cocomelon, they're learning the songs, they're learning the dynamics. So we don't watch it that often because Timo's not that into it, but he knows the boy and the girl and the baby. And he's got little cocomelon dominoes, and he matches up the mum and the dad. So he knows the characters and how they interact and how they work as a family. So, I mean, that's learning. He's learned the relational dynamics of that family unit. Like, how can you say that's not educational? He's learned a thing. Children are always learning, and one type of learning is not necessarily better or worse than another.
Absolutely. And I think that's the main takeaway in terms of content, in terms of what you're observing. I mean, if you're observing that your child is having less tantrums or is responding much better to a certain type of media, then run with it. Every child is different. So you don't have to stick to one thing. If someone's like, oh, cocomelon is trash, but it's the only thing your kid watches, then it's fine. It's not trash. It's really quite good for your child. There's nothing negative in it. It's not violent. It teaches your child that brushing your teeth is okay. It teaches your child that pottying is okay. All these things that are actually really hard to teach your child, they are being normalized by television characters that are cute and fun, and there's music. So yeah, what works for some people won't work for others, but don't demonize something that's working for someone is all I really want to say about it. And there's one more thing that I think talks to the thing that we always talk about the most, and that's this idea of using television as a break. Now, there was a study that was done and looked at how parents who use screens to calm their children down those children experience more tantrums when disconnecting from the screens. And it was on Parenting Translator, who is amazing on Instagram. She does some really amazing stuff. She's so prolific. But the way she described this one study, I didn't agree with, and we talked about it, and we have different views on it, and that's okay. But basically what this study said was that if you use, what some people interpret this study is saying is, if you use screens to calm your child down, they are going to have more tantrums and bigger tantrums. But that's not what the study said at all. So what the study did was it asked parents, do you use screens to calm your child down? Does your child have tantrums when turning the screen off? But it also asked, what's your child's temperament? And had a whole bunch of questions to get at the child's temperament. So what that study actually found was that parents are significantly more likely to give their child a screen to calm them down if they have a more challenging, high-demand temperament, especially for children with high urgency and more negative affect. That's when parents are more likely to use those screens, and it's because those parents are more burnt out and have less capability, less tether to be able to handle the tantrum because they themselves are about to fall apart. So they're either going to yell or they're going to hand a screen to the child. Now, does that screen time then lead to tantrums? Yes, but it's mediated by the temperament itself. So a child who has a higher demand temperament is going to have higher tantrums regardless. An easygoing child probably isn't going to have as big a tantrum, but a child with a high demand, high urgency, negative affect, all these kinds of things is going to have a bigger tantrum when disengaging from something that was keeping them calm, that was something that was pleasurable to their brain, and they're probably feeling a lot more dysregulated, and potentially the parents are cutting them off before either of them is ready because they're feeling guilty. So this study doesn't say that it's your fault if you hand your child a screen when you're about to lose it and they're about to lose it because then they have a tantrum later. It's just kind of collecting this correlation that difficult temperaments tend to have more, difficult temperaments tend to lead to more use of screens, and difficult temperaments have bigger tantrums. The association isn't between more use of screens and more tantrums. That is not the association at all.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I don't think
kids with more intense or more challenging temperaments are more likely to be given screens by their parents, and kids with more intense and challenging temperaments are more likely to have tantrums. Exactly what you say, but there's not necessarily, but a wrong conclusion has been drawn that screens equal more tantrums. No. It's a common issue within this kind of research where the sampling bias happens, is that there's so many studies like this, is that people who, like, for example, let's think of another sample, like whether it's like saying people with brown hair use more brown hair dye. No, this doesn't make sense. Cut this out. I have no idea. I'm trying to think of an example on the fly.
I have a good one because I use it in my media lecture. So the graph I show is that there has been a decline in pirates and an incline in global warming at the same rate. There is a strong correlation between the number of pirates present in the world and the issue of global warming. Does this mean that we should assume that if we put more pirates into the world that global warming will reduce? Absolutely not. There's something that's driving both of those factors, and they may not be the same thing. Correlation does not equal causation. There's often a mediating factor, and not only is there a mediating factor, but they could be two completely different things. So when you're looking at simple correlations, which is what that study is, there is no causal conclusion to make. And that is a big problem. So you can't simply say that there's association between using screens and tantrums, because there's a lot of other things that go into that. And a lot of them have to do with temperament and innate personality differences. Now, does this mean that we're saying that you should give your kid a screen if they're having a meltdown? No, not a good idea. Try a different method first that maybe teaches them a way to help themselves eventually. But if it's between you screaming, crying and curling in a ball, or leaving the house and never coming back, or a screen, you can choose a screen, and that is so fine. If you need help navigating tantrums, that is in episode 6 of our podcast. We talked all about tantrums and how to manage them and things that you can try if you have the capacity to do that, the emotional resilience to do it. If you've been worn down by your child, if you've got a high demand child, if you have an easygoing child and it's still been a really hard day and you're either going to lose it or give them a screen is the better option. I guarantee you, because hitting your child, screaming at your child, any of these things are far worse than giving your child a screen so that you have an opportunity to have a break and a breath and to feel better so that you can then parent better.
Absolutely. And this is something, I think this is like a perfect corollary for like dinner time battles, which is, I think, a topic we should definitely cover in another podcast episode. But the idea that if it comes down to letting your kid have another bowl of ice cream versus a breakdown in your relationship because of the ensuing battle and fight, I think another bowl of ice cream is a better option. Like, we really need to think about these things in terms of what is the goal. And we always have to think about, on one side of things, we have the relationship we have with our child, which is, to be honest, like one of the most important things that you offer your child in this world is strength and security and safety in your presence. And if that is at jeopardy, then find another way to maintain that safety. That's the real thing. So exactly what you say, like, if it comes to between screaming at your child and losing your temper with them, or a screen is not, like, is the lesser of two evils. Not that I think screen is evil whatsoever. No. But screen it's just really about identifying and finding balance. Everything in moderation, including moderation.
Absolutely. And I think we're going to sum up the screen time chat there, because we've been recording for an incredibly long time. So Siobhan, kick me off with a meltdown moment.
Nice. Well, let's do a screen meltdown, because we've been having a few of those. Because, as I mentioned, we had our 2 weeks and we just had lots of TV girl, TV boy, which, for those who don't know, are all of those wonderful YouTube channels where kids just play with toys. And my child's obsessed with them. Oh, so cool. Sophie from Russia, she's a fan favorite. Anyway, I digress. Timo comes up and says, "Mummy, TV puta, TV girl, sit on mummy, TV puta." He likes to watch it on my computer screen. And also because we had that additional week of COVID isolation, I was supposed to start work. So I was trying to get work done with a toddler in the house. Anyway, he sat on my lap while I did work and watched TV. Anyway, so we've been cutting that back, and he's been less than impressed, and so there's been lots of tantrums. So that has not been fun. That was the meltdown of the week. There's been lots of them. And, yeah, so it's scaling back and moving back towards a more happy medium that we're more comfortable with and he is less happy with, but that's okay. These things happen. And I guess this kind of ties me into my highlight. What do we call them? Meltdowns and magic moments. Mm-hmm. My magic moment is he just makes me laugh so much because he's obsessed, as we've talked about, with caramello koalas and Freddo frogs, which are little chocolate Australian treats. And we live next door to a service station or a gas station for our American friends. And there's just a never-ending supply of chocolate available. And it's the sweetest because we got out of lockdown and he went, Mummy walk with Timo to buy Freddo. And so 3 times in one day, we walked down, we rode his bike, all of 20 meters, and walked up to the lady at the service station. He picked out his frog, his chocolate frog, handed it to the lady, took the card, tapped, got it back, said thank you, and wandered back home to get Daddy to open it. And it's just magic. It's adorable.
It is adorable. And who cares that your kid had 3 chocolates in one day when they're doing that kind of like social behavior that is setting them up for a life in our society? Like, that's amazing.
Exactly. And, exactly. And like it's this beautiful social dance where he gets to interact with the cashier and he just has a great time. And I just beam with happiness because he's the cutest bloody thing in the world.
It's absolutely adorable. Well, my meltdown moment is mine, not my daughter's. So over the last couple of months, maybe the last 4 weeks, my daughter, so when she breastfeeds to sleep, she likes to stroke me, but she's discovered that she likes to stroke my underarm. And that is the most infuriating thing in the world to me.
It sounds so gross.
Well, I'm not a sweaty person, but like just her little tickly fingers under my underarm while I'm trying to lie there. And I usually read a book while she's feeding to sleep because she takes like 10 minutes or whatever. And that usually means that I'm not resenting sitting there for that long because I have a busy brain. And if I'm lying there, I'm like, I'm going to do this and that and this and that. So like I read my book, but then like she's not only like sucking on me, which in and of itself is getting kind of grating because she's now a 2 year something and she's still breastfeeding. And like, I'm kind of confused about where I want to take this breastfeeding journey as it is. But yeah, now she's like tickling my underarm at the same time. And I don't let her do it. I move her hand and I squish my arm down so she can't get in there, but the little hands try to wiggle their way in. And even that is annoying. And eventually she gives up and just like strokes my body in more appropriate, like less infuriating places. But I am, every time I feed my child to sleep, on the precipice of like losing my mind. And I go downstairs to my husband afterwards and he's like, cuddle? And I'm like, no, do not touch me.
Do not touch me.
I don't want to be touched right now. And it's just, it's infuriating. I don't know. It's a new thing. It's fine because she used to twiddle my other nipple while feeding, and I managed to stop her doing that. It like eventually went away. It just took some time. And now we're up to underarm tickling, and it's like it really works out. So and then my magic
sucks.
Yeah, it really does. But then my magic moment is that she is magic. Like this age, there's so many times throughout like the holidays and throughout the day when like my husband and I will just look at each other while our daughter is like off playing pretend. And we're just like, what is this? Like, who is this like incredible, like smart little thing who is acting out with like her Barbies and like having full conversations with them? Like, ignore the fact that like she's actually talking to someone that isn't us for once. Like, that is amazing. But like she's like having these full conversations and they have these like social relationships between her Barbies, and it's this pretend play and it's independent that like is just amazing and mind-blowing to me. So that is my magic moment.
Yeah, I agree. It's such a fun age watching their like, and particularly as they get more language, watching the way their brain works and seeing those gears turn. It's just, so much fun.
So cute. Yeah. So anyways, that's us for this week, guys. We hope you enjoyed our episode on screen time. and our magic and meltdown moments, feel free to drop those in our Instagram DMs if you'd like, so that you don't feel quite as alone, and so that we don't feel quite as alone. If anyone's got a 2-year-old that's still breastfeeding and does something really infuriating, please let me know, because I am not the only person experiencing this. I know this, but please tell me the weird things your toddler does while feeding to sleep to help me feel better. Yeah, we'll see you next week. Bye for now. Bye.
See you guys. Bye.